Hi, welcome to my channel. Today we're looking into the disappearance of John Patrick Kerrigan, missing July 20th, 1984, Ronan, Montana, 58 years old, 6 foot tall. Father Kerrigan disappeared from his home, foul play is suspected. Gray or partially gray hair, blue eyes, and here is a photo of him. Okay, and then he was in that one newspaper article. It says John Patrick Kerrigan of Ronan, last seen July 20th, 1984 in Ronan, born January 10th, 1926, 58 when he disappeared. At the time of that newspaper clipping, which was 1994, he would have been 68. The Reverend John Patrick Kerrigan, a Catholic priest, vanished 2 days after his transfer from Plains to Ronan's Sacred Heart Parish. Parishioners reported him missing after he failed to show up for a weekend service. He was last seen the night of July 20th, 1984 at a Ronan bakery where he had stopped on his way home from jogging. Kerrigan's clothes were found July 21st, 1984 along State Highway 35, 3 miles northeast of Polson, on the east shore of Flathead Lake. His shirt was stained with his own blood. A $100 bill was tucked in a pocket. His 1976 Chevrolet Impala was found 8 days later, parked in a swale just outside the Polson city limits. The car had spots of blood on the interior. In the trunk, police found a bloody pillow and a shovel and a small cardboard box containing a wallet with $100. The car keys were found in a field about 30 yards from the car. Authorities found no links with the disappearance of an Episcopal priest in southwest Montana 2 years earlier. Kerrigan and the other missing priest, the Reverend James Anderson of Townsend, were friends, having worked in White Sulphur Springs at the same time earlier in their careers. Kerrigan's case has been featured on NBC's television program Unsolved Mysteries, which focused on possible connections with the unsolved murder of another priest, Ronaldo Rivera, who was shot near Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1982. Two escapees from the former Swan River Youth Camp passed through Ronan the night Kerrigan disappeared, later kidnapping and raping a young woman in Avero. The two denied any involvement in Kerrigan's disappearance, said Lake County Sheriff Joe Keldridge. On July 22, 1984, the day after Kerrigan's clothes were found, 18-year-old Reed Nevins killed a 41-year-old woman in her Polson home. He had been in Ronan the night Kerrigan disappeared. Nevins was questioned, but also denied involvement, Keldridge said. And this is a true crime detective in the UK. You can see the web address in the upper left-hand corner. It says Unsolved Mysteries, the mystery of 5 dead priests. 5 dead priests were brutally murdered in the 1980s. Were these crimes coincidences or the work of a serial killer? By Michael East. Published in True Crime Detective, October 26, 2022. And there's the picture. The killing of a priest is a shocking crime, while the priesthood has received a terrible reputation from all manner of scandals in recent years, often through truly abominable crimes. Most priests remain pious and generous, often to their own detriment, frequently pillars of the community. A strike against them is seen as an attack on, perhaps even God himself. There is a sense from most that a man of God of off limits to crime. But between 1981 and 1984, at least 3 priests were murdered, with 2 more vanishing, a possible suicide. Some believe it may all be linked together. Father Ronaldo John Rivera was 57 years old and served as a priest at the cathedral. I don't know how to pronounce that. Basilica. Forgive me if I don't know how to pronounce that. Basilica of St. Francis in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He could boast a long and distinguished career serving the faithful in the state across several parishes, both large and small. He was described by those who knew him as kind and pious. Pious. There's his picture. It was a warm summer evening on August 5th, 1982, when the rectory at Cathedral Basilica received was at first seemed like a sad and distressing call. Around 8:30 p.m., a man called the payphone claiming to be named Michael Carmela to say that his grandfather was dying at a rest stop close to the ghost town of Waldo, stating that the elderly man wished to receive the last rites. Waldo, a former railroad community, is remote and sparse with little remaining of the original town. The priest who took the call, Father Patrick Gerard, informed Carmelo that he was partially sighted and could not safely drive out to the location. Instead, Gerard asked that he call back when he found assistance and alerted his colleague, Father Rivera. Rivera took the call when the seemingly distraught grandson called back, and he agreed to make the journey with Carmela, saying that he would be waiting in a blue pickup truck at the location on top of La Bajada Hill, or Bajada Hill. Rivera never returned. 3 days later, the body of Father Rivera was found several miles from the alleged location of the dying man. He was lying on his back in a field off Interstate 25 south of Santa Fe. Alongside a gunshot wound to the stomach, he had been strangled with a metal wire that was believed to have been a coat hanger. Meanwhile, his brown 1974 Chevy Malibu was found at a rest stop on Interstate 40, the gas tank being empty. Investigators never found his glasses, wallet, or last rites kit, and believe that the priest had been tied up and killed elsewhere before being dumped, with the culprit wanting the body to be found. Investigations into the background of Father Rivera showed nothing unusual, yet an FBI psychological portrait of the killer suggested that revenge was the motive behind the killing. However, revenge doesn't have to be personal, with the possibility that the killer was seeking his vengeance against the entire priesthood being a possibility, particularly as he couldn't guarantee that Rivera would have been the one to answer the call. A Catholic priest was a target for whatever reason. Robbery was not a motive because there was nothing taken from the priest other than his last rite kits, and that's a possibility for a souvenir. One of the lead investigators told the NBC's Unsolved Mysteries, apparently the killer would like to relive the experience every time he looks at it. He remembers killing a priest. There were few clues as to the killer's identity beyond fingerprints found in Rivera's car, with 50 suspects being investigated and eliminated, including a recent parolee. Despite tips from an outraged local community, the trail grew cold and the leads stopped developing, with nobody ever being caught. The killing lingers over Santa Fe, with Rivera still being mourned. In 2009, the Archdiocese dedicated a new wing of the cathedral to his memory. What a violent, hideous crime, Archbishop Michael Sheehan of the Archdiocese of Santa Fe was quoted as saying by KRQU News 13 in 2010, to ask a priest to come and do his ministry and then at that moment to take him and kill him. Evil thing, evil thing. The story of Father Rivera's murder may well have ended there, with the priest being the lone victim of a man driven to the extreme by some known grudge against the church. A case destined to be unsolved. However, revenge is an emotional that is rarely satisfied, and the brutality of the killing alongside the duplicity speaks of a killer likely to strike again. It was July 20th, 1984, and Father John Patrick Kerrigan, 58, had just arrived at Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Ronan, Montana. A small city, Ronan comprises just short of 2,000 people and lies on the Flathead Indian Reservation, and Kerrigan had just been transferred there from Plains 2 days ago. Following a jog, he left a bakery in the city's downtown area and was never seen again, failing to report for morning mass the next day. When Kerrigan failed to return either later in the day or the next, a missing person report was eventually filed on July 23rd, with police making a grim discovery on July 29th. Bloody clothing was found along Montana Highway 35 near Polson, alongside a bloody coat hanger, all located just 5 miles from Ronan. The next day, Kerrigan's vehicle, curiously also a brown Chevy Malibu, was found abandoned several miles away. Inside the trunk was his wallet alongside a pillowcase and a bloody shovel. The body of Father Kerrigan has never been found, and police believe that he was murdered, with some linking the killing to that of Father Rivera. The coat hanger is telling, with the possibility that one was used in the murder of Rivera. In both cases, the vehicle was moved. However, Rivera was left in the open, with the killer wanting the body to be discovered, whereas here the body was hidden, possibly buried. Following the vanishing of Kerrigan, New Mexico, authorities were alerted due to the obvious similarities in the two cases, and efforts began to try and uncover if the two priests had been linked personally beyond their shared membership of the church. Investigations found that in the spring of 1983, Kerrigan had spent 3 months at the Congregation of the Servants of Paraclete in Jimenez Springs, New Mexico. The congregation was used as a retreat for priests suffering personal difficulties such as alcoholism, drug abuse, depression, or sexual misconduct. Despite being in the same state, no link was found to suggest he had even met Rivera. The church confirmed Kerrigan had been at the Congregation of the Servants of the Paraclete, but refused to say why. Yet it wouldn't be the only link between Kerrigan and claims of sexual impropriety. In 2011, two separate groups of individuals brought a class action lawsuit against the Diocese of Helena for sexual abuse. 3 years later, the church published a list of 80 members of the local clergy suspected or implicated in sex crimes against children. Kerrigan was on that list. Whether the murder of Father Rivera is linked to the disappearance of Father Kerrigan is a matter of dispute, with some seeing the parallels as evident. In contrast, others deny there is any link at all. Speaking in the Santa Fe, New Mexican back in 1992, the detective in charge of the Rivera case said there is no connection whatsoever between the two cases, highlighting the different disposal method of the bodies. Deputy Police Chief Gilbert completely disagreed, saying that the dumping of the clothes was just an effective way of showing a priest had been killed. While the police disagree over a connection, one writer has an entirely different theory, suggesting that the entire Kerrigan affair is a smokescreen. Brian Ambrosio, author of Montana Murders, Notorious and Unsolved, has gained access to notes made by detectives on the case and suggested that Kerrigan wasn't murdered at all and instead faked his own death, constructing the scene as murder while he fled, with possible accusations of child sex abuse and the murder of Rivera being well known. The theory may hold some validity. While some believe that the killing of Rivera and the apparent killing of Kerrigan are linked, others believe the series is far broader than that, with no less than 5 priests murdered. In December of 1981, James Harry Rios had a fateful meeting with Father Patrick Patty Ryan, 49. Ryan was a parish priest in a small town of Denver City, Texas, having a population of just 4,700. The town was typically Texan and conservative, and like most small towns, gossip is likely to have been prevalent. Somehow, however, Father Ryan seems to have kept his private life secret, passing himself off as John to Rios, an other man he met, with Father Ryan being secretly gay. However, some say that Ryan's secrets went far deeper than that, with 2 teenage boys saying he once propositioned them for sex. I was wondering about the $100 in his pocket. I don't know if he just took it out of the bank or the other man, the other priest. Anyway, or if he propositioned somebody and they killed him. Anyway, Rios had been hitchhiking as a bail bondsman had taken his car. Father Ryan picked him up as he traveled from Denver City to Hobbs, New Mexico, with Rios headed there to look for, or if the killer put the $100 in there to make it look like it, I don't know. Anyway, Rios picked him up as he traveled from Denver City to Hobbs, New Mexico, with Rios headed there to look for work. Rios, who was also in the closet, struck up a quick relationship with the priest, and the two had several liaisons over the next few weeks. Such was the brazenness of their affair that Ryan invited him to the rectory. However, on December 20th, Rales claims he left the priest after Ryan assaulted him at the rectory, leaving in haste and intent on leaving town. Not long after, the bondsman was willing to release his car, and Rales needed a ride to get there. He headed back to Father Ryan and apologized for the incident at the rectory, with Ryan being gracious and agreeing to give him a ride. According to Rales, the two picked up another hitchhiker along the way. As Rales got into his own vehicle, he saw the priest drop the hitchhiker off. On December 21st, Father Ryan checked into an Odessa, Texas motel, giving a false name and details. He was soon found dead in a room covered in blood, his hands bound. The priest was naked and face down with a slice wound across his buttocks. He had suffered terribly in death and had seemingly fallen victim to one of the many liaisons he's picked up in his car. However, despite no forensic evidence that he was anywhere near the hotel and plenty of other evidence that he was already 100 miles away in Hobbs, New Mexico, the police arrested and charged James Reyes with the murder of Father Ryan. The case essentially rested on a confession that he made early in the investigation, but then recanted, claiming later to have felt guilt and shame about his sexuality. Reyes was campaigned to clear his name ever since, and says the eyewitness statements and cash receipts from Hobbs show he couldn't have been in Odessa at the time of the murder. A state trooper even pulled Reyes over for speeding around the time of the killing, 200 miles away from Odessa. The killing of Father Ryan has some similarities to that of Father Benjamin Carrier. Carrier was a distinguished priest from San Diego who worked in many parishes along the west coast, and at this point worked at the Our Lady of Light in Descanso in Florida. The church welcomed transients and hippies through its doors and was perhaps one of the more liberal Catholic churches. Carrier was suffocated to death at the El Rancho Motel, Arizona, on November 10, 1982. There was no suggestion he was gay or had been involved in any kind of illicit liaison. His wallet and 1981 Toyota pickup truck were missing, suggesting a possible motive of robbery. Like Ryan, his hands had been tied behind his back, this time using electrical tape. His vehicle was found 2 days later up in Las Vegas. Our detectives went up there and processed the vehicles for evidence. Sergeant Lori Franklin of the Yuma Police Department told KYMA News in 2018. Carrier had last been seen with two unidentified men the days after the murder, described as being in their early 30s, around 5'6" tall and white. One of the two men was unusually carrying a cane with a skull at the hilt. In another similarity to the Ryan case, not long after the murder, the San Diego Union Tribune reported that the priest had a history of picking up hitchhikers. On one occasion, Carrier had had a knife held to his throat. Local witnesses suggest a link between his previous generosity and the killing, with some saying they saw Carrier pick up the two men up earlier in the day. Meanwhile, at the motel, the manager said that he observed one of the men sitting in Carrier's truck, and the priest had paid for two people to stay the night, perhaps indicating he had tried to get them a room out of his own pocket. Despite questioning several people in the case, the trial was very cold quickly, and nobody was ever brought to justice for the murder. I think of it quite often. There are times that I remember that particular case. I grew up Catholic. You never think of a priest getting murdered, so that's a big deal. Yuma Fire Department Fire Chief Steve told KYMA. He was a passerby in town murdered in Yuma. It left a lasting impression that I still think about to this day. There's a photo of the two suspects in the Carrier case. Oh, they look like they could be brothers, don't they? Father Ryan murdered in Texas, 1981. Father Rivera murdered in New Mexico, 1982. Father Carrier murdered in Arizona, 1982. Father Kerrigan murdered in Montana, 1984. There are even other names to add to this list. James Otis Anderson, for example, was an Episcopal priest from Townsend, Montana, who failed to show up for services at St. John's Episcopal Church, June 13, 1982. Earlier in his career, he had worked with Father John Kerrigan in White Sulphur Springs, and they were considered friends. His disappearance preceded the murder of Kerrigan. Anderson showed no signs that he was planning on vanishing. His sermon was laid on his desk, and most of his belongings were where they should have been. However, his address book, a treasured Afghan, and a pistol were missing. None of his credit cards or bank accounts were ever used again. His disappearance alongside a gun raises alarms that Anderson either believed himself in danger or intended to harm somebody, perhaps himself. According to his wife, Anderson had been acting strange recently and had become uncommunicative and distant. Some of the reasons that the couple was undergoing a divorce. It would be far from unusual for a man to be suffering in silence, putting on a brave face for his congregation while secretly torn apart by the failure of his marriage and deep-buried depression. Should he have killed himself in a lonely spot, his body may never have been found, and in October 1982 his silver 1975 Volkswagen was found well hidden in a wooded area of White Gulch in the Big Belt Mountains northeast of Townsend, half a mile away. His prayer book, Old Testament Bible, cap, eyeglasses, and clerical collar were all found on a ridge overlooking Townsend. It seemed the most likely explanation that Anderson had driven out to the area and committed suicide. And yet, Anderson's ex-wife said he was a poor driver, and it was implausible he would have been able to drive to the location on his own, with the road being one for experienced and skilled drivers. While in cases of depression it is often not a factor, she explains that he adored his children and wouldn't have left them behind willingly. Finally, there's the mystery man. Some say he is a suspect in the killings of Father Ryan and Father Carriers. Others say that he too may have been a priest. He was deeply tanned when he walked into Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Boise, Idaho, December 4th, 1982, a month after the murder of Father Carrier. His clothes were Western in style and suggestive he may have been from the Southwest. If anyone wondered who the mystery man was, they would be asking for a long time, as after entering, he swallowed cyanide. He had no ID, carried $900 with a note saying it was for his burial, and wanted anything else left to the church. Oh, and the other man, who was getting a divorce, had signed everything over to the church for his life insurance as well, and they ended up getting it. So that's interesting. Okay, so he had no ID, carried $900 with a note saying it was for his burial, and wanted anything else left to the church. He signed the message as William L. Toomey, an alias taken from a company that manufactured vestments for priests. Investigators used a belt buckle to track him to Arizona, yet that's as far as anyone got to identifying him. What links these deaths is open to debate and interpretation. The use of the coat hanger, familiar car, and other suggestive evidence would seemingly confirm that the murders of Rivera and Kerrigan were the work of the same hand. One that was willing to kill priests in two different states. Father Ryan and Kerrigan seemed to have an interest in children, or at least adolescents, while there was no evidence that Rivera and Carrier did. While Kerrigan met his end in Montana, Ryan, Rivera, and Carrier were all murdered on the southwest coast, and small towns away from too many prying eyes play a part. Anderson knew Kerrigan, and there's a possibility that Kerrigan may have met Rivera, but nothing for sure. The links appear, and then they vanish just as quickly. There is a sense of something here between these deaths, of some connection that exists just out of reach. Perhaps a single crazed individual had a vendetta against the church and any priest who crossed his path. Perhaps they shared a terrible secret, or perhaps in the end, coincidence and seeing patterns that aren't there is the only truth. Whatever the real story, at least 3 men were murdered without justice, 2 of them seemingly doing nothing more than offering kindness to strangers. They deserved more. True crime detective. And then it talks about true crime detective, and you can pause it and read more about it. And then it talks about supporting his work. And then it talks about going to that page. If you enjoyed this story, please consider purchasing my book. So he has a book on Amazon. And then you can also go to this website, and if you backtrace it to here and just type in truecrimedetective.co.uk, then I'm sure you could find some pretty good information. Written by Michael East. So this looks like a really interesting website. And so it's got other stories that you can click on as well. And it tells how long it takes to read them. And I'm going to save his website to my favorites because later I might want to look into that. So, and here's a newspaper article. Ronan priest who disappeared accused of sex abuse. Polson. While the Roman Catholic diocese, I don't know why I can't think of the word right now, of Helena in April posted the names of 80 former employees, most of them priests and nuns, who had allegedly sexually abused children in western Montana. It also shook the dust on a 31-year-old murder mystery in Lake County. Among the priests placed on the list of alleged child sex predators was Father John Kerrigan. In the summer of 1984, Kerrigan vanished just a couple of days after being transferred from Plains to Ronan's Sacred Heart Parish. He was last seen at a bakery in Ronan. Neither he nor his body has ever been found. But his clothes were. Shortly after Kerrigan disappeared, a passerby noticed them in a heap at a turnout along Montana Highway 35 on the east shore of Flathead Lake and called authorities. The clothes were stained with Kerrigan's blood. A $100 bill was tucked in one shirt pocket. A week later, the priest's car was found several miles away, parked near radio towers off Polson Skyline Drive. It had been wiped clean of fingerprints, but there was blood in the front seat, blood on the passenger side door, blood on the passenger side floorboard. In the trunk was a bloody pillow, a bloodied shovel, and Kerrigan's wallet with more than $1,000 in cash. So they didn't even bother robbing him, and robbing wasn't a motive, obviously. The keys to the car were found in the weeds 30 yards away. Unless somebody didn't know that. Oh no, they would have known his wallet was there. Authorities were aware back then that the allegations of sexual abuse of children involved Kerrigan, according to Joe Geldrich, who was the Lake County undersheriff when the priest disappeared and became sheriff in 1985. Oh yeah, we were sure, Geldrich said. He had been moved all over the state. Ronan and Kerrigan's 13 parish assignments since being ordained in 1954, with none of the postings lasting longer than 6 years and the priest being moved 3 times in 1965 alone. The priest, who was 58 when he disappeared, had also been assigned to St. Patrick Parish in Butte and 1954 and 1955, St. Francis Parish in Hamilton, 1955-1956, St. Lawrence Parish and Walkerville from 1959 to 1962, St. Rose Parish in Dillon from 1962 to 1964, St. Anne Parish in Butte in 1964 to 1965, Little Flower Parish in Browning in 1965, Holly Rosary Parish in Bozeman in 1965 and 66, St. Michael Parish in Drummond from 1966 to 1972, St. Bartholomew Parish in White Sulphur Springs from 1972 to 1977, St. Joseph Parish in Chateau from 1977 to 1980, and St. James Parish in Plains from 1980 to 1984. If he was molesting children and bounced around to all those places, that puts a possibility of a variety of people ending up being his victims. Still, Geldrich said he does not believe the alleged sexual abuse was a motive in Kerrigan's likely murder. We developed some suspects, says the former sheriff, but we never really had enough to wrap it up with. With all the cash left behind, robbery obviously wasn't a motive either, but Geldrich declined to say what might have been. I wouldn't want to talk about that, he said. I don't want to mess it up for somebody else to be able to solve it. And then we have this story here, and I'm not going to read this one, but you can pause it and read it or look for it online. It's podles.org. And then it's also on Wikipedia, 1980s Franciscan priest murders, and it talks about that as well. So, let's see. We have the Charlie Project, which you can pause and read that as well. And it says another local man, Curtis Holmen, disappeared from the same general area 2 days after Kerrigan did, and his vehicle was found abandoned about 40 miles from where Kerrigan's car was found. Holmen's brother believes the two cases could be connected in some way, but this theory hasn't been proven. Police could find no connection between Kerrigan's case and the 1982 disappearance of James Anderson. So, the mention of Curtis Holmen is interesting. And I'll scroll down so you can pause it and read it. If you're interested in it. In 2011, two separate groups of victims sued the Catholic diocese in Helena, Montana, alleging that between the 1940s and 1970s they were sexually abused at the hand of Jesuit priests and Ursuline sisters at the St. Ignatius Mission and the Ursuline Academy. The plaintiffs implicated 12 priests from western Montana, as well as 21 nuns. One of the priests they named was Kerrigan. Because many of the alleged abusers have since died, and because of the statute of limitation, no charges could be brought against anyone. As part of the settlement reached with the victims, however, the church published a list of the alleged perpetrators in 2015. The lawsuit, which involved hundreds of abuse claims, was settled for $20 million. It drove the diocese into bankruptcy. Foul play is suspected in Kerrigan's case, and he is presumed to have been the victim of a homicide. But it's unclear whether the abuse scandal had anything to do with it. Yeah, because that one man went missing. Curtis Holmen disappeared from the same general area 2 days after Kerrigan. It could have just been a hitchhiker. But a hitchhiker with no vehicle, it seems like they would have been after money and been interested in robbing him. And I do want to look at the Wikipedia and skim through it. I'm not going to read it all. It says 1980s Franciscan priest murder refers to the mysterious disappearance and murders of two Catholic priests. And it talks about them. And let's see the subjects. Whoops. Father Ronaldo John Rivera, born October 29, 1924. And let's see. It says days later. He claimed his grandfather was dying near a rest stop. Oh, yeah, I read that. Eyesight too poorly for him to drive safely. And then days later, body found, been shot once in the stomach, strangled with wire, possibly a coat hanger. Rivera's Chevy Malibu discovered in a parked at a rest stop. Gas tank empty. Last rites kit was never found. FBI intervened in the investigation and produced a psychological portrait of the person. Let's see, he also ruled out, law enforcement briefly considered a recent parolee. His fingerprints not matching the unknown prints discovered on Rivera's vehicle. But I don't know if the fingerprints on the vehicle could have just been somebody who noticed a vehicle parked there for a long time and called the police. The Reverend Father John Patrick Kerrigan had served a priest in Plains, Montana, before being transferred on the evening July 20th, 2 days after his arrival and appointment at the church. He left the bakery. Last time he was ever seen, articles of bloody clothing were found lying alongside Montana 35 highway at the shores of Flathead Lake near Polson, along with bloody coat hanger. These items were located roughly 5 miles from Ronan. His vehicle, brown Chevy Malibu, was discovered abandoned several miles away. In his trunk, his wallet, this says it contained $1,200, was found, along with blood. So the money that it says that's in the wallet at different is different on different websites. So, because I believe the other one I thought said over $2,000 or $2,000, and this is 1,200, and some of them just mention $100 in the pocket. So I think that's interesting that there's different stories. It seems like so. And then you can pause this and read it. Anyway, don't forget to pray for the families and the loved ones of the men who went missing, as well as their possible victims and the children of the church, and these children that may have suffered abuse at the hands of these priests. How horrific. How horrific. Anyway, and feel free to leave comments, and have a blessed day. Bye-bye.